Hello, everybody. This is Mike from the Hey, Are You Still There podcast. My wife Beth and I would like to invite you to join us each week as we examine life at the intersection of marriage, family, careers, and ministry. Through 28 years of ministry, 26 years of marriage, 23 years of professional careers, and 21 years of being parents to 3 kids, our fun and honest discussions promise to have something for everyone. And now, on to the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another special pop-up podcast of the Hey, Are You Still There time with myself, Mike, and
Beth.
And we started a few weeks ago a little series on the Enneagram, and you can go back and listen. Episode 1 touched on our introduction to the Enneagram. It's specifically around me because that's kind of how we first fell into it, totally by accident. A retreat that I went to with Ian Crone and learning about the Enneagram, coming home with that, and us as a family, and especially Beth and I as a couple, to start diving into that and just studying how the Enneagram affects us personally, how it affects us as a couple, as a family dynamic with our kids, our coworkers, our friends. It just spreads out to everything. And so we found the Enneagram to be pretty life-changing and eye-opening. And so, like I said, episode 1 had the introduction into kind of what the Enneagram was and my number. Episode 2, we talked about Beth and Beth's number, and hers is shockingly completely different than mine. I'm a 1, she's a 7. I'm known as, it used to be called the perfectionist. Now it's called the reformer or the improver. Beth is the joyful enthusiast. She's that 7. And we talked a little bit about kind of how that looks as it pertains to our kids. And then we also kind of broke down, you know, you got the Enneagram, which is 9 numbers. We kind of broke that down into triads. And there's a group of numbers, 3 numbers that kind of come from a place of origin. For example, 8, 9s, and 1s are considered, they come from the gut triad. You've got 2, 3s, and 4s, which come from the heart. And then you got 5, 6, and 7s, which are known as thinkers, and they come from the brain or the head triad. And so it's not enough just for us to have 9 numbers. We also have to break those up into groups and kind of see where they originate from. And again, that's all covered in the first 2 episodes. This episode, we're talking about wings.
Like that you fly with.
Yes.
Like birds.
You love birds. We just put some more bird food out there for the birds this spring and the bird feeders.
And there were like 100 birds. I feel like it wasn't that many, but it did look like about 20 in our yard the other day. I think they were robins. I'm not great at identifying birds yet, like my mom and Jacob and Josh. So pretty much everybody but me, but I'm working on it. But we're not talking about that kind of wings.
Just like your plants. Your plants and birds are things that you're trying to learn more about.
Well, and then also, this is the typical 7,
getting
into everything. Because in addition to all this, I've been following the eagles and their 3 little babies, and the mom and dad eagle that hatched these eggs, and there were 3 baby chicks, and they survived like 100-mile-per-hour winds, and the mom got so covered in snow at one point you couldn't even see her in the nest. But then one of the chicks died, and at first everybody thought it was the small chick, because there was a big chick that kind of hogged all the food, but it wasn't. I think it was the big chick. But anyway, this is what 3s do.
Spoiler alert.
we go and we get like super focused on all these different things for a little while. You know, this too shall pass.
That's the enthusiast in you.
Yes.
You enjoy learning. It's the brain, the head, the thinking through things, focusing on a certain hobby or topic and just diving into that.
But the problem is when it becomes monotonous or routine.
You move on.
That's like death to me. I cannot stand it. It's drudgery. It's
That's
awful.
why you've been married 11 times.
I've not been married 11 times. Gosh. One time. This one, that's it.
Yeah, but it wasn't long before the enthusiasm waned. I can tell you that. Here I am as a 1 trying to make you perfect, and you are not excited about that
at all. Because it's funny because we have this sheet we looked at, and it talks about like how to get along with me. And so it's funny that Mike says, I'm trying to make you perfect. But like to get along with me, what it says I like as energetic, lively, and optimistic, and I want to contribute it to the world. What I want you to do is give me companionship, affection, and freedom. Engage me in stimulating conversation and laughter. We do that. Appreciate my grand visions and listen to my stories. Don't try to change my style. Accept me how I am. Be responsible for yourself. I don't like clingy or needy people, and don't tell me what to do. So it is like amazing.
You don't even have to take the test. That's it.
But it's funny because like it's amazing because you're like, yeah, I would like to make you a little more, perfectionistic or whatever like I am. And I'm here like, don't tell me what to do. Stop being clingy. But I can't help it. That's who I am.
That's your number.
It's my number. Yeah.
That's how God made you.
Mm-hmm. So all you listeners, if you're like, I really want to bond with Beth, well, that's how you do it. That's what you engage me, so you want to be with me, but don't come on too strong. Don't be clingy or needy, because that'll stress me out.
Well, fortunately, we're not talking about the wings of birds.
No,
we're not talking about Red Bull giving you wings.
No,
we're talking about the wings of the Enneagram.
Yes.
And what the wings are is once you take a test, or maybe you can just read a book. I had a friend of mine told me he started reading The Road Back to You, and he got to the chapter, which was his number. He didn't even read the rest of the book because he said that one chapter just rocked his world and made him realize this is me. Like, this is absolutely 100% who I am, what motivates me, how I do this. But so you find your number either by just reading the description and knowing it's you, or taking a test, and then you have
But
numbers.
I would also say be careful with the test, because the other thing is if you overthink the test. The reason I know this is I did this test with my parents, with my kids. Like, I was there on the computer reading questions. And like, if you start to overthink it, like some of the questions are like, well, do you do this? And they'll be like, oh, well, sometimes, it's like, unless you go with like really your gut instead of like, because I think the hard thing is for us, sometimes we're conditioned to do things that aren't our natural inclination. So I think that's why for a long time, I actually thought I could have been a 1, because I'm sort of conditioned by my work and my environment to be a perfectionist. And when 7s are unhealthy, they tend towards to being a 1. So when I'm unhealthy, I already feel that way. But also my work requires attention to detail. I have a lot of 1s in my life. We can talk about that in a little bit too. So that influence of that. But I say all that to say the test can be tricky, because I think sometimes just people take a test and they either answer the questions the way they think they should answer, or the way they've conditioned themselves, instead of like the way they naturally want to answer. So I think sometimes that causes people to maybe test in a way that they get a number that's not really their number.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep remembering. I've said this every podcast about the Enneagram so far, and I'm going to keep saying it. The Enneagram doesn't tell you what you do. It tells you why you do what you do.
Yes.
The Enneagram is about the motivation. And that's where you have to figure out your behavior and what motivates you. What is nature and what is nurture?
Right.
Because some of it could be nurtured. It could be the way that you were raised. If you were raised by type 1 parents,
right?
1s being the perfectionist, and you had a mom and dad that were perfectionists, and that's what they drilled into you, then there might be some perfection tendencies you may have, but that's not your natural leaning. You're doing it because you have that voice in your head of your parents saying,
right,
clean up the table, clean the dishes, do this better, and make better grades, whatever. You have that voice, but it's about why you do what you do. The Enneagram is about that motivation. It's the thing that is your natural, like you said, you use the term gut feeling. What is that instinct? If I didn't have anybody telling me what to do,
what would I do?
What would I do? And because that's your true motivation.
Well, and that was the crazy thing. This goes, I think, with any type of test, especially in the psychological context. But even when I got diagnosed with ADHD, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 40, even though everyone around me knew that I had it except me. But it wasn't acceptable when you were young and an achieving girl who didn't misbehave to have that diagnosis. But I remember when I talked to my psychiatrist, when she was testing me and talking about everything, she told me that too. She said, you can't answer the questions the way you've like rigidly trained yourself for 40 years to operate. Like, answer these questions the way when you feel that spark, or that's how I feel. And to your other point, I think this is also the danger. There's been we'll talk about this too, but we've said what we think some of our kids and our family are, but we're judging that based on how they appear to us on the outside. And I think that's the other danger in just looking and saying, well, so-and-so looks like they're super energetic and optimistic, therefore they must be a 7. Because to your point, it may not be that they fit all of these other things internally. They may act like that on the outside, but internally, that's not really what's driving them.
Yeah, and you don't want to use the Enneagram as your own kind of like personal predictor of the people in your life. You don't want to be like, oh, that's a classic 3,
yes,
or classic 8.
There goes Mike being a 1 again.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, you are a 1, but like, what if I was like, there goes Mike being, an 8, if you are confronting me about something, that doesn't work that way.
And that's why I think the importance, I'm telling you, we put a link on the first test, on the first episode. I'm going to put a link on this one. It's called the WEPSS test, and I can't remember what all that stands for, but to me it is the most thorough test you can take on the Enneagram. The one I took was back, I was looking January of 2018, and I think if I took it now I would still be a 1, but because I don't think that number ever changes. But as we're going to talk about in the next and last episode of our 4-part series, there are unhealthy and healthy sides to every number. And when I took this, I was an unhealthy 1, and my wing was unhealthy. So I was not in a great place in 2018. I feel like I'm in a much better place now, 7 years later. But here's that word, wing, again.
Yes.
So every number, obviously, if you look at the Enneagram, you look at the picture, it's a circle, there's numbers all the way around it. So that means every number is going to have a number beside of it. You are going to share some of the tendencies from one of those numbers. Not necessarily both, but from one of those numbers. For example, I am a 1 with a wing of 2. That means I'm a perfectionist, reformer, improver by nature. But I share some of the tendencies of a 2, which is known as the helper. You want to help others. And if you go and look at my life, everything I've ever done, I was thinking about it in every job I've had. And I've been in ministry now almost 29 years. But prior to that, the jobs I had were service-oriented jobs. It was working in a grocery store, working in a shoe store, working as an usher at a coliseum. Everything was about helping people in some way, even though it was getting their groceries bagged or rung up, or making sure they had the right shoe, or getting them to their seats. Everything was about service, and I enjoyed those jobs. So I'm not somebody that hated those jobs. It wasn't just something to pay the bills while I was in high school and college. I enjoyed that. And so I think, I agree with that 100%. I am a 1 with a wing of a 2. I have that reformer, that improver. I do want to improve things. Because I like to help people. I like to be of service. So that's what a wing is. It's your number and one of the 2 numbers beside of you. Because
your other option would have been being a 1 with the wing of a 9 if you had not been a 1 with the wing of a 2.
Right. And when you read and the test will tell you what your wing is. And so the 9s, you read over what a 9 is. And a 9 is great. A 9 is the peacemaker. Yeah. And I'm, I can keep the peace. That's fine. And so it's not that I don't have some peacemaking in me, but if 1s was the greatest percentage, 2s had the next highest between the 2 and the 9. And that's my wing. What's your number again, and what's your wing?
Well, the only other thing I was going to say about that too with the wings is like sometimes too, I think if you're like, you don't totally identify with one number immediately. If you read both of the wings, sometimes that description also helps you confirm you're that number. So for example, when I read the wings of different numbers for people that I was doing this test with, it might be like, well, if you're a 1 with the wing of a 2, they tend to be a little more charismatic and warm and nurturing because they have that piece to it, so you may not come across quite as much as a 1 who's dead center or 1 with a 9. I am a 7, and it was hard for me because the 6 is kind of that, you might have some anxiety and, but you're loyal, and I'm definitely all of those things, but I'm more towards a 7 with the wing of an 8, which also for me makes sense because the 8, when we talked about last time, that's that challenger who wants to stand up, not just for themselves, but they stand up for people that they love. And they tend to be confident and strong and direct, and they value trust. It's interesting because they tend to be independent, take charge and meet challenges head on, courageous. The reason I think that all of that makes sense for me is, yes, I'm this 7 who enjoys fun and loves things. But if you read about a 7 with the wing of an 8, they tend to be, some of that more outspoken, which I think goes along with being a lawyer and that deep interest in justice and wanting to defend people. That's been a part of who I've been. If I feel like somebody's mistreated, I'm always in there like, no, you can't do that to them. But also I think, 7s with the wing of an 8, they said, can sometimes be a little more organized and not appear as 7-ish, and like that, like we're able to actually sometimes be a little more regimented in what we do. So I think all of that makes sense for me as a 7 with the wing of an 8. So again, it's just another mechanism to sort of help you learn a little more about yourself and the way you operate and why you might look different if somebody else tells you they're a 7, but they have a different wing, why you may be different.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you and I both share numbers on what I would call, I guess, the side of a triad.
Yeah.
So, a 1 is in the gut triad, but a 2 is in the heart triad.
Right.
You're a 7.
I'm in the head.
And then the 8 is in the gut triad.
Right, which is the other thing when I was saying things like, go with your gut, because I think through things, but there's a lot of things that I just kind of have this intuition or gut feeling
right.
on.
So I think if you find yourself, being in one of the middle triads, I'll say, let's say a 9 or a 3 or a 6, something like that, whatever wing is on either side of you,
you're still
fits in that triad.
Yeah,
so you're probably a little bit more dogmatic and it's just, sunk in and rooted in to that triad. Where if you're on one of the, again, the sides of the triads, as I would call it, and you have your wing that's in another triad, that might soften things a little bit or make things more confusing for you. I don't know, I know one thing, I usually don't overthink things. Right. And so the head triad, honestly, is as far away from me as I can get.
And again, talk about opposites. I overthink everything. Yeah. So that's what I do best. Overthink. Yeah.
So, I tend to go with my gut first. How's it feel in my heart? And go with it.
See, I overthink. And then once I've overthought, then ultimately I go with my gut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy how this works.
Yeah.
So we had, you brought up a minute ago, a wing helping you kind of identify some other things. We have a good friend. He took a test. I don't know which test he took, but it came out that his top 2 were exactly the same as far as percentages of the test, what he answered correctly. And it was a 9 and a 2. So he came out as a peacemaker and he came out as a helper. And I've known this person 30 years and I can see him as both. But what I suggested is that he read his wings, and because as a 9, he's definitely not an 8. And I really haven't seen any 1s in him, as far as being a dominant or even a wing, of a 1. So when you look at it, I could definitely see him as a 2 with the wing of a 3 because I've kind of, I know him. I know him very well. And in looking at him and his life and decisions and how he kind of talks through decisions and whatnot, to me, I would have nailed him as a 2 or a 9, just like the test said. but then I would probably have to look at the wings. And then when I looked at the wings, like I said, I didn't think he was an 8. I didn't think he had any 8 kind of in his motivation. 1, maybe a little bit. But 3s, yeah, I could see that. And so, and when he looked at his test, when you start looking at, I think 3s were kind of higher up than some of the other numbers. And so, like I said, my thoughts is he's probably a 2 with a 3 wing, even though his 2 and 9 tested out at about the same thing.
Right.
And so if you're struggling between 2 numbers, the wings can help. The wings can help you kind of zone, really just kind of pinpoint where you are and what that main number may be.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting, because I did the test with somebody, so not to focus too much on 1s, but I had somebody else in my life who tested as a 1 with the wing of a 2 like you. And one thing I thought was interesting too is because they talk about how 1s can sometimes come across, because of that desire for justice and equality and that want to be organized and, bring perfection to the world, which is not a bad thing. But some 1s can seem harsher. And this person that did the test is very outgoing and things. And so, again, you're like, oh, but they definitely, when I look at them from the outside, I think, knowing this person well, I think they were 100% a 1. But it was interesting because when you're a 1 with the wing of a 2, they talk about 1s with a 2 wing are usually warmer and more interpersonally aware. So that starts to make sense too. If that person's like, well, I don't feel like I'm, as strong as maybe as perfectionistic as some people. Well, you may still be a 1 that has that internal voice like that you have, Mike, and that 1 core, but that 2 softens you as far as interpersonally. It was interesting because I did this with there was a married couple, and one of the people is a 1 with the wing of 2 and the other is a 2 with the wing of 1. And it's fascinating because I see the perfectionism and the 1 aspects very heavily in both their lives, but you also see the 2. But if you really know these 2 people, you can really see how 1 probably tends a little more towards that feeling and that heart-based and that serving helper a little more, and the other's a little more in that 1 category. So it's just kind of fascinating to look at it and to think about the wings and how that changes things. I will also say you can go as deep as you want. I read one book, I'm trying to remember, it was considered like the Enneagram Bible or something at one point. It was so dense and so complex. It was hundreds of pages and it went so deep into everything. And because I am a 7, I was really into it at first, and then it overwhelmed me, and I was like, I don't care that much anymore. So
yeah, and that's it's funny. I posted on the Enneagram forum on Reddit that our podcast, and just said, hey, if anybody's interested, and immediately I was getting replies of well, there's better books than Ian's, and there may be, but I'm saying Ian Crone's The Road Back to You, and even his sequel that goes a little deeper, he writes in layman's terms.
Yeah.
You can just understand. And so if that's where you're at, if you don't know anything about the Enneagram and you're hearing about this for the first time, I recommend reading Ian's book. But if you're a little familiar with it, then you may want to dig a little deeper and get into a lot more of the weeds of the Enneagram. Right now, this series we're doing, this 4-parter, is just high level, scratching the surface, just trying to explain what these various things, components of the Enneagram are, and how it affects our life.
And I think the other thing is for us, again, to keep emphasizing, this isn't some answer to everything, but I think many personality tests or spiritual gift tests or things that you take, it just helps you better understand yourself and sometimes those people around you. And I think by understanding your core motivations, it just helps you better think about what you need to do. And just a very simple example, but even in what I gave up for Lent and what I'm kind of taking on which is kind of abstract, which I know is a weird thing to say for Lent, but I'm really working hard to not have my phone around as much, because 7s tend towards gluttony, essentially. That is because we don't want to be deprived. I think that's that FOMO thing. We don't want to miss out. We don't want to sometimes process this deep inner pain, and we don't want to feel deprived of like joy and experiences the world has to offer. So I think it's natural for 7s to have a tendency towards maybe an addictive personality, but not in the sense of always like you're going to become addicted to drugs or alcohol, but addicted to anything, whatever distracts us from what we don't want to feel. And the phone is, there's all this research now about it making you release dopamine and what our phones are doing to us, but that habit of just being on the phone and reaching for it. So, you've walked in the house and found me at sometimes like coloring. You're like, what are you doing? Well, I'm coloring because my phone is over there in the other room. Or like last night when we were playing board games with Ross and you were like, I'm going to try to call you. And I'm like, I don't have my phone. Now I know it sounds silly because I was on the computer to play board games, but I have a tendency, as you know, to be doing 14 different things at once. And I'm trying to be more present. The reason all of that matters as a 7 is like, if I have this self-awareness to know that this is a deep core struggle, otherwise I don't think that would have been a very obvious thing. And it would have been easy for me to just say, well, I'm going to give up caffeine and that's a sacrifice. But is that really getting to the core of like an issue I need to resolve in my life? Is that getting to the core of something that's separating me from a better relationship with God and a better relationship with my family? Probably not, because coffee, I love it and don't want to live without it, but it's not, it's not the same as something like a phone and the impact that has on my life. But I think for you, it would be your struggles are very different than my struggles, the things you're trying to avoid, the things that motivate you.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about that on our next episode. It'll be our final episode, but it'll kind of talk about the positives and negatives of both numbers, of our numbers. It's called, when you read about it, it might be healthy, unhealthy, or some, I guess, feel like that's even too negative.
Yeah.
And they call it resourceful and less resourceful side of the numbers. And Beth brought up gluttony with the 7s. They do say 7 of the 9 pretty much connect with the 7 deadly sins, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
And so it's called the 7 deadly sins plus 2, because there's 2 more things thrown in there. But every number does associate. With 7s, there's his gluttony, just like Beth explained. And we'll talk about this in more detail next week. But mine, being a 1, theirs is anger.
Yeah.
And that's their 7 deadly sin is anger. And the anger comes from things not being perfect.
And from all the ones that I know, you see that. I mean, and not I don't mean that again in a negative way, but like you can see outwardly sometimes the signs of that anger that escapes when things aren't the way they feel like they should or could be.
Right.
So I think that, I just say all that to say this, I think like any tool, it's exactly that. It's a tool that can help us be a little more introspective in a world where, I don't know, we're filled with like, do these 10 things and you'll be more efficient or whatever. Or here's these 40 self-help books. I think this is just something that helps you really think about, well, what motivates me? What drives me? Outside of even what people would see outside, it really makes you focus inside on what makes you who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in today. This was, like I said, part 3 of a 4-part series. If you've missed the first 2, you can go back and check that out on the Hey, Are You Still There website or any podcast carrier, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, podcast, or whatever. We're on everywhere, even YouTube. And so you can go check us out there and follow up. And if you have any comments about the Enneagram, you can leave comments on any of those sites or on our Facebook page. So you can just kind of let us know what you're thinking about there. But Enneagram's fascinating. I think it's life-changing, discovering it. And I'm looking forward to wrapping things up next week as we look at the healthy, unhealthy, resourceful, less resourceful sides of our numbers.
Well, and it's been fun just seeing the other people that pop up and tell us like, oh, I'm taking the test. And I'm like, you are? Or like, this is the number I think I am.
Yeah, we've had a lot of comments and interactions with folks that are now curious about the Enneagram.
Yeah, which has really been fun, I think. And even, some, I know I had said, be careful not to try to peg people, but you do look at certain people and think, like your kids or something, what number they are. And some of my kids are like, no, I am not the number that you think I am. But then other people, like my parents are like, yes, I am the number that you think I am. But again, I think just once it's confirmed, and, you can even look up things like we have a sheet that talks about not only your number, but it's like how to get along with me. So you could read each number. So I can read about the 1. And now that I know, Mike, you're confirmed, you have confirmed you're a 1. It's not like I've identified you as a 1. I can go look and say, okay, 1s are hard on themselves. I need to reassure them that they're good the way they are. I need to tell you I value your advice. There's little things in there that can help enhance your relationship.
And look at how this ties in. We spent a whole episode of one of our podcasts talking about the 5 love languages.
Yes.
From Gary Chapman. And Beth and I talked in detail about how our love languages are complete opposites.
Yes.
Beth's top love languages tend to be about
quality time,
doing stuff.
Yes, which kind of goes along, I think, with being a 7.
Right.
I want that time, that experience.
And my top, and my bottom is quality time.
Yeah.
But my top couple have to do with like feeling loved.
Right.
Whether that's physical touch or words of affirmation.
Right.
So that's funny that when you read about these are 1s,
right.
1s need to be told it's okay.
That we love you how you are. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You need that affirmation and or
so
hug.
Maybe I need to call up Dr. Chapman and maybe him and I can
work together.
We can co-author a book, The 5 Love Languages of the Enneagram.
Or the 9 love languages of I don't know. You'd have to but again, it's very insightful because, and I also wish, if I knew for sure what my kids were, I think a lot of this would have been really helpful with them because with one of my kids, we suspect they're 6, which is the loyalist, and they value loyalty, family, friends. They can be reserved and timid or outspoken, so they can, and confrontive, so they can be whatever.
And that's him.
Yeah. And exactly, because there are times with this child that it would be like, I am not going to go to the counter to ask for a refill. I'm going to send a sibling to do it. But then there are other times when it is like, oh my goodness, you need to take a chill pill because, he would confront something, but he's loyal. And, but when it talks about how to get along with him, being direct and clear, listen to him carefully, which is hard for me because I'm always like, oh, let me give you this idea of the solution. I've got a vision, don't judge him for his anxiety, work things through with him, reassure him we're good, but laugh and make jokes, push them towards new experiences. I mean, that's something we have to do with this one and try not to overreact to my overreacting. These could have been things that if I could have figured this out when this child was younger, I feel like I could have parented a little differently, just because I would have had this insight that I don't have, and particularly for the numbers that are very unlike you. And I think that's what's so interesting about us. Maybe it's intuitive if you've got 2 7s that are married or 2 1s, or maybe if you're super close in your numbers, like the 1 with the wing of a 2 and the 2 with the wing of a 1, you might be a little able to be intuitive about how to interact with that person. But for those of us who are really, really opposite in how we sort of see the world and approach the world, this can be a really helpful tool in understanding one another.
Yeah. I mean, in our family of 5, there's at least 4 or 5 different numbers.
Yes.
Yeah. And so our daughter's the only one that's kind of still up in the air. We think we know what she is. She thinks she knows what she is.
One of our sons too. He says he's something that we didn't think he was. And so I don't know. Maybe he is. But I also don't know when they took the test how much they really
understood how they're supposed to answer.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
All right.
Anyway.
Well, hey, thanks a lot for coming along this ride with us. This is Mike and Beth from the Hey, Are You Still There podcast. We do more than just the Enneagram.
Yes.
We're just a married couple that just explores life at the intersection of marriage, family, careers, and ministry. Some weeks we talk about all four of those things. Some weeks we may just talk about one of those things, but we have fun, lighthearted, sometimes deep discussions, but what you're getting is our authentic selves.
Yes.
We don't hold anything back. There's nothing.
And our lack of expertise, but willingness to talk about it despite said lack of expertise on any topic.
Oh yeah, like we are just making
We
it up
will
as we
dive
go.
right in and talk about it. Just like the Enneagram.
That's right.
We are not life coaches. We have no formal training or anything, but we've read about it a lot and lived some.
Now
of it.
you're making it sound like we just walked off the street.
No, we don't. No, I know. But what I'm saying is, like, I didn't go get like a minor, like a major in psychology and a minor in the Enneagram.
But you're an attorney by trade.
Yes.
So
I'm.
you have to figure out people.
Yes.
And study and look behind the curtains, so to speak, to try to get to the root of things.
Yes.
I've been in ministry for 29 years, so I've worked with people. I do more counseling than anything else. And so, we don't have a degree in the Enneagram, but we have a degree in life.
I also think I have to put the disclaimer out, though. I think that's part of my problem, though. As an attorney, you realize how little, because I realize how little I know about everything. So I don't know that I would consider myself an expert in anything, but I probably am. That's the other thing, because I just feel like, again, and part of this is probably the 7 personality. There's so much more to learn about everything. And so I'm always like, well, there's always somebody out there that knows more than we do. But to your point, we have a lot of life experience around the Enneagram and some other similar things.
Some would say you're the valedictorian of the School of Hard Knocks.
No, that was you.
That was you.
I was the valedictorian of my high school. You're the valedictorian of the School of Hard Knocks. But mine was not the School of Hard Knocks. It was a different high school.
All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot for listening. Until next time, this is Mike.
And this is Beth.
And this has been the Hey, Are You Still There podcast.